This episode is made possible by our sponsor, Omega Bright Wellness. I've taken their omega-3 supplements for many years, and so has my wife, and that's why I invited them to sponsor my podcast. I'm proud to have them. You can find all of their products online at omegabrightwellness.com, and bright is intentionally misspelled B-R-I-T-E, omegabrightwellness.com. Hello and welcome to Distraction. I'm your host, Dr. Ned Hallowell. Today's show came about as a result of my TikTok videos. You know, I have a series of about 40, 60-second clips on TikTok, which I've had a lot of fun doing and have had over 4 million views now. And one of them was about why people with ADHD crave sugar and sweets. And the fact of the matter is, we do. As a group, we are famous for having a gallon of ice cream at midnight or watching TV with a jumbo bag of M&M peanuts, not just a little bag of M&M, or snarfing down chocolates when nobody's looking, or even just taking a spoonful of sugar out of the sugar bowl. You know, it becomes that blatant. We love our sugar and sweets. And I got a huge response to that TikTok video. Remember, it's only 60 seconds long, so, you know, people were going to respond. They have to respond right away. And so I thought it would be fun to dive into the subject a little bit further with an actual, real, live expert. And so one such expert appeared in my life, and her name is Becca King. She's a dietitian who has ADHD. She's also really done her homework. She's got several degrees. She's a registered dietitian nutritionist. She's a licensed dietitian nutritionist, and she's a master of science. So she's not just making things up out of thin air. She went and got tough degrees to get and worked hard to get them, and now she's out there dispensing her knowledge and doing so in a very warm and charming way, I can tell you. She works with ADHD folks particularly, and helps them address issues of binge eating, and as she puts it, find food freedom. I love that phrase, find food freedom. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but gosh, I mean, so many people don't have food freedom. They're in food prison, and they're either craving it or feeling guilty about satisfying themselves, or fearing it, or feeling depressed because of it, or putting up big dental bills or other kinds of bills because of it. And finding food freedom, what a great phrase. You ought to put that on your card. In any case, Becca, thank you so much for joining me from North Carolina, where you have your practice. Welcome to Distraction.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, thank you. So let's just start off with some questions that I have, and I think a lot of people have. How can I break the pattern of binging on these carbs when I love eating them?
Yeah. So part of it is there tends to be, I find there is almost this binge restrict cycle that we have a lot of times where we tend to binge in the evenings, especially if you're on meds, to tend to binge in the evenings when your meds wear off. And then you eat to the point that you're uncomfortably full. And then you go to bed. You usually feel guilty afterwards. Go to bed. You wake up the next morning and you're like, I'm not really hungry. I'm going to take my meds. And then you go on with the day and you barely eat all day. And it kind of becomes like this vicious cycle that is hard to break. But there's a lot of times we use sugar for sweets for dopamine. So getting that stimulation, it tends to be a good source of that for us as well. I find with my clients, one of the ways to really break it is making sure that we're eating it in a mindful way. A lot of times we tend to eat with a lot of distractions, and it can be painful to eat without distractions. That is probably the number one thing my clients tell me when we work on eating without distractions. Like, this is physically uncomfortable. And I'm like, I know it is. I can experience that myself sometimes. But a lot of times
to eat without distraction. How does that, what do you mean?
So a lot of times we tend to sit down, like, especially like in front of the TV,
Right.
or doing work, or we might have the TV on and we're scrolling on social media and
Right.
have
Right.
multiple things going on.
Right.
And it really inhibits us from being able to tap into the sensory qualities of food.
Yes.
And a lot of times those sensory qualities help us get satisfaction and help us tell us when to stop eating. So when we're disconnected from those, it's hard for us to tap into our fullness. So we tend to eat past fullness a lot of times.
Simply because we're absently watching TV and just putting things into our mouth.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've had some of my clients, I'll tell them, like, okay, try it without having the TV on. They're like, yeah, actually I did eat a lot less this time. And I actually, a lot of times they're like, I didn't even realize I wasn't even tasting the food when I'm just kind of mindlessly eating it.
Now you mentioned that carbs of any kind give you a shot of dopamine. Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So when we eat carbs, particularly ones that are higher in sugar, they're going to give us a quick little dose of dopamine. And if it's high in sugar, it'll give us some serotonin too. So it'll give us that calming feeling and some of that pleasure and satisfaction.
Just so listeners know, dopamine is associated with pleasure, and serotonin is associated with calming and reduction in anxiety. So you're getting two neurotransmitters, for every molecule of sugar or carbs that you eat.
Yeah, and our brains tend to be lower in dopamine, so we're always looking for ways to get that stimulation, and especially right now with COVID and everything, and not having a lot of our other ways of getting stimulation. I think a lot of people now, food has become a more accessible source for stimulation.
Absolutely, yeah. It's right there at your control. I mean, why you mentioned the pattern of you have the big snack and then you go without eating throughout the next day? Why do you do that?
A lot of times it's usually for some people on medication is because they get up and they might eat breakfast, they might not. And then when they take their meds, they don't have an appetite, or they hyper-focus, tend to hyper-focus on something. And then if you hours go by and then they're like, oops, I haven't even eaten anything all day. Or it tends to pop up on our radar. I say for like a second, we'll say, I'm hungry, but let me finish one more thing. And then one more thing turns into several more things.
Right. I mean, how do you stop yourself from wanting a snack at midnight if you're in the habit of, before you go to sleep, you go down to the refrigerator and grab some ice cream or a spoon of peanut butter or something like that?
If you're hungry, as a dietitian, I tell you, if you're hungry, go eat a snack, because if you're going to go to bed hungry, you probably won't sleep great. Probably have trouble going to sleep. Making sure that when you're eating, it is a conscious eating experience. So making sure, like putting it in a bowl instead of, eating it out of the container, and sitting down and making sure you're like actually focusing on the fact you're eating it. Can really help us too, because we tend to, if we're not paying attention, we'll eat something and then not recognize that we're full and kind of move on to the next thing or eat more.
That's so true. You can take the pint or quart or gallon of ice cream out of the freezer and you just stand there, even with the freezer door open, with a spoon, and you just keep eating it. And so if you actually put it in a bowl and brought the bowl over to the kitchen table and sat down with, a glass of water or something and ate it, chances are you'd eat less.
Yeah, exactly. And I find even with bags of chips and things like snack foods, to even do it with that can be helpful too. Because you're also getting you're actually able to visually see how much you're eating.
So don't eat the chips out of the bag.
Yeah. I mean, I think it can, especially if you're someone who tends to eat the whole bag when you sit down to eat it. That can help too. I do the same thing with to-go food or frozen meals. I put them on a plate just because it looks more visually appealing than eating it out of a plastic or styrofoam container. And that can help us get more satisfaction from what we're eating, so we won't need as much food to feel that satisfaction.
Yeah, these are such good practical suggestions. Is carbs the reason that people like beer as well, or is that also the alcohol?
I would say probably both would be my guess. I don't know for sure, but that would be my guess. Is probably some of it's the alcohol, and then some of it is the getting some of those carbohydrates as well. And
how about just not buying M&Ms in the first place? Can that help?
I take a different approach.
Okay.
A lot of times there will be people who say, just don't keep it in your house and you won't binge on it. But then you'll go, maybe you go to a friend's house or you run through the store and you're really craving it, and that urge for that craving's too much to miss out on.
Right.
It's kind of basically that deprivation sets us up to overeat that food in the future. So trying to normalize it and kind of make it, I do stuff with my clients to kind of work on habituating some of the foods that they feel out of control around. So that way it just kind of loses that bright, shiny object syndrome. And it's just part of what's there instead of making it this thing we put up on a pedestal. Is like, ooh, I really can't control myself around it. And a lot of times what happens is when we have these experiences, we're like, every time I overeat this, so we tell ourselves we don't have control over it. And then so we're like, okay, I'll just get rid of it. And then whenever that craving comes back, we tend to have that same eating experience where we eat it kind of usually in a disconnected way from our bodies. We overeat, feel guilty, and then tell ourselves we shouldn't have it again. And it kind of is this cycle. So kind of breaking that restriction and normalizing it.
Hey, this is Sarah, producer of Distraction. I'm here to share a new feature with you that's coming up at the end of this episode. Dr. Carol Locke, the founder of Omega Bright Wellness, one of the sponsors of this podcast, shares some of the latest scientific knowledge regarding the COVID vaccine and how it's affected by all of these variants we keep hearing about. Dr. Locke has been involved in conversations with the Harvard Medical School, the CDC, and the FDA regarding the latest variant information, and she shares what she's learned with you at the end of this episode. Dr. Locke's company, Omega Bright Wellness, is currently offering Distraction listeners 20% off their first order with the promo code DISTRACTION. That's at omegabrightwellness.com. And speaking of new features, we are excited to announce that we are adding another episode to our weekly releases. Every Monday, Dr. Hallowell will answer a question from one of our listeners. Yesterday's question was from a listener named Victor, who is unhappy in his job and was looking for career advice. Take a listen to that episode to hear Ned's advice. And of course, if you have a question that you'd like Dr. Hallowell to answer, write an email or record a voice memo and send it to connect@distractionpodcast.com. We are very thankful to the Foreman School in Litchfield, Connecticut for sponsoring this new series. Foreman is a co-ed college prep school dedicated to empowering bright students who learn differently in grades 9 through postgraduate. You can learn more at formanschool.org. We hope you enjoy both of these new features.
What are some other principles toward finding food freedom?
So making peace with food, which is kind of that whole idea right there of just kind of making food. So taking the morality out of food is a big part of food freedom. So not necessarily like being able to view food as food instead of good versus bad. While there are foods that are obviously more nutritionally dense than other foods, we tend to internalize our food choices. So if we eat something that we label bad, then we tell ourselves, well, I'm bad, so I should feel bad about myself. So kind of moving away from that and making food choices that honor our health and our taste buds, but also make us feel good.
So I love how you try to take the morality out of it and just make it a neutral decision. I mean,
yeah. So because when you basically make peace with food, you're not going to always want those necessarily unhealthy foods all the time, because a lot of times
Right.
most people say if you eat intuitively, you'll just want to eat cake all day. But if you ate cake all day, you'd feel really crummy. So, so it's like that's not really it, but it's just balancing things out and making choices that way.
Yeah, and with your clients, do you find that they're able to make these kinds of adjustments and get to a more of they actually can find food freedom? Yeah.
Yes. I find a lot of it is working through, some of it's the executive functioning piece of like, how do we plan or remember or organize things, or how can we kind of figure out the support system at home too, so that we can, make cooking meals easier and less overwhelming. That's a big piece of it. And probably the biggest piece, if you do struggle with binge eating, for most of my clients, is distracted eating. So figuring out how to like limit those distractions in a way that doesn't make things completely painful for them. And working through too, just like the emotional aspect of food, which I think right now with COVID and everything, I think we're using food a lot more for comfort and things like that.
Yeah. Boy, you're so right. Becca King, Becca, Becca King.
Yes.
You can find Becca on Instagram with the username at ADHD.nutritionist. That's at ADHD.nutritionist. And you do consultations with people on Instagram, or how do you work with your clients?
It's through Practice Better, which is like a HIPAA compliant platform. So you can use the link in my bio, and it allows you to set up a free call to see if we'd be a good fit to work together.
Oh, okay. So but they should go to Instagram and look at your profile.
Yep. And that link will take you right there, and then Practice Better has my whole bio and everything there.
And Practice Better is on, the link to that is on Instagram.
And I will have a website coming in the next few months. So I'm
that's
good.
But for now, go to Instagram and with the username at ADHD.nutritionist. You sound great. I mean, you're smart but also very friendly and user friendly, and find food freedom. What a great phrase. What a great phrase that is. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
So again, if you're interested in working with Becca, click the link in our show notes to schedule a time to speak with her, or go to Instagram with her username at ADHD Nutritionist. And remember to reach out to us with your questions and comments by emailing connect@distractionpodcast.com. And please give us a like and follow us on social media. And if you're on TikTok, you can find me on there as well. My username is at Dr. Hallowell, or you can search the hashtag NedTalks. Get a copy of my newest book with Dr. John Rady, ADHD 2.0, by clicking the link in the show notes, or by going to my website, drhallowell.com. That's drhallowell.com. You can also find ADHD 2.0 wherever books are sold. All right, well, keep listening, please, after this episode for a special segment from Dr. Carol Locke. She is a true genius and the founder, developer, and CEO of Omega Bright Wellness, a truly amazing woman. She'll be sharing some of the latest scientific knowledge regarding the COVID vaccine, including some information about the newest variants, the development of vaccines, and how they work against the variants, and more. It's really worth it. She's a genius. That's coming up right after this episode ends. I hope you will keep listening. Distraction is created by Sounds Great Media. Our recording engineer and editor is the wonderful Scott Persson, and our producer is the also wonderful Sarah Guertin. I'm Dr. Ned Hallowell. Don't know how wonderful I am, but I'm glad to be with you, saying goodbye for now.
So hello, this is Dr. Carol Locke, and I'm here today to talk about the COVID vaccine and questions people are having about variants. So variants are mutations, and all viruses mutate. Most mutations from the virus, the COVID virus, don't affect its ability to infect people or cause severe disease or make the vaccines ineffective. When the changes in the virus begin to make a difference in how effective it is and whether it can cause severe illness or evade the vaccine, that's when they become important. And there are a number of variants being tracked globally right now and being tracked in the United States. You know, the variants are of concern, but the vaccines are effective against the variants. And these are the Moderna, the Pfizer vaccine, both of which are in use in the United States and require 2 shots, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which will likely be approved very shortly and requires 1 shot. Right now, what we know from the vaccines is they prevent severe illness and death, but we don't have the information yet to know that they prevent transmission. So we don't know yet if having the vaccine will prevent you from having a virus in your nose or respiratory tract where you can infect people. That until we know that, people who've been vaccinated need to wear masks and socially distance in case they are still able to spread the infection. And that is important with the variants too, because if they can stop severe infection and death, but you might become infected in a mild way with a variant, you could spread it. One question people have is when will this end? And right now, we don't know the exact date when the pandemic will end. What we do know is that by getting vaccinated, we stop the severe illness in people, we stop the hospitalizations, and shortly we will know better how well the vaccines stop transmission. And that will give us guidance on how long we wear masks, social distancing, and if you have a vaccine, what do you then do in your life? How do you make changes? But right now we know it's important to get vaccinated, and we know that it's important to continue to wear masks and continue to socially distance to protect your family and other people in the community. As far as the end of the pandemic, we don't know an exact date. The way to get to the end, the way we will end this pandemic, is by vaccinating the world. That will stop the infections and it will stop the mutations that cause increased infection or the ability to go around a vaccine. So that's why it is so important for everybody to get vaccinated and to address your concerns, your questions with a doctor, with a nurse, with someone that knows your Department of Public Health. Reach out with your questions because it's important that you feel comfortable knowing that this vaccine is safe, they are well tested, they were well developed, and we have an excellent program. And the important part is to get vaccinated to protect yourself, your community, and the world. Thank you for listening, and this is Dr. Carol Locke.
The episode you just heard was made possible by my good friends at Omega Bright Wellness. I take their supplements every day, and that's why I invited them to sponsor my podcast. Shop online at Omega Bright, and that's BRITE wellness.com.